Tell me, what is the path to progress for Europe? Is that infrastructure, safety, security, education?
I think it's getting European confidence back. I think Europe has lost, in a lot of ways, its footing as a continent, as different countries. And I think it's getting that confidence back in the ability to do great things and in the ability to make big changes and going back to a creator mindset. And a creator mindset is upside, not downside oriented. That's in the end, the only thing that's required. It's not a $500 billion into NVIDIA chips. It's getting back that mindset and saying, okay, we're going to create incentives across the board from the frontline workers where we started, right, on the street, to the CEOs in the boardroom and to the ministers in the cabinet room, giving them all incentives to take risks, to create, and to get upside. And across the system, we're going to reshape the system as an upside-oriented system. And if that happens, and that's a step change, but it's, I think, absolutely possible, it would be everything. Be much more than any single investment that you can make. There's no single solution. You need to change a mindset across the continent.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the European EUVC podcast. Today, I have Shmuel Chafets with me from Target Global. And first of all, Shmuel, we're going to talk all about AI, but let's just make sure that everyone understands who you are and where you're coming from.
So thank you for having me. I'm Shmuel Chafets. I'm one of the founders of Target Global. Target is a VC firm, European venture firm headquartered in London. We started it in Berlin about a decade ago. We're early investors in the European ecosystem. We invest across Europe, Israel, Middle East, and Africa. We have early stage funds and early growth funds. So we invest in startups across software, fintech, mobility, logistics, healthcare, and consumer internet. We've invested in about 140 companies, been very, very fortunate to be investors in companies like TravelPerk, Flow, Rapid, Revolut, so some really great AutoOne, Delivery Hero, so great European and Israeli companies. Some of them we've exited, some of them we're still working with and having fun doing it.
And this is your second time on the podcast. You were invited on for a second round because the first time we talked about the tech reset and we asked you, what is your core message to the European venture ecosystem? And you said, everyone panic. Then you laughed and gave a little more nuanced view. Today, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to almost talk about the opposite because it's quite an opportunity rather than a reset. We're going to talk about AI in the frontier services in the front line. We're doing so on the back of you and I having seen each other in London because you were so kind to invite me to join you for a dinner that you did with a bunch of policymakers and important stakeholders to the future of AI in Europe. You launched this report that I have with me, From Human to Hybrid, AI and the Future of the Frontline. Great piece of research. We'll put it in the show notes for everyone to read. Go on EUVC. There it'll be in full so you can enjoy it. Shmuel, tell me first, why are you focusing on this? And why are you zeroing in on the front line and so on?
First of all, thank you for coming for dinner. I actually thought it was surprisingly interesting, I have to say.
Yeah, it was great.
A very engaging conversation with a very diverse group of people, which shows how top of mind this issue is for everybody. So I think obviously AI is top of mind for us, as it is for everybody, right? I want to repeat what I said last time to everyone. Please panic. I think if there was a time to panic, it's now, actually. There's this incredible revolution that's unfolding in front of us. It's not going to be the revolution that we think it's going to be, most probably, right? I think that's almost always true for these types of tech revolutions. But it definitely is a complete overhaul of this entire industry and of entire areas of our existence, right? It's really incredible, and it's happening right now. And we're seeing this pace of change that's really unbelievable. I think when you listen to the European conversation about it, unlike the American conversation, you see a lot of the risk, definitely the policy conversation. A lot of it is about controlling the risk, job losses and privacy and everything. And you absolutely have to think about that. I think that's a relative advantage actually of Europe in this is the regulatory environment and everything. You do have to think about the risk, but you absolutely have to think about the reward. That's something that's a bit missing. And that reward is, on the one hand, the possibility to build new industries, to reinvent existing industries, to make marginal businesses profitable, to get productivity up across Europe. And productivity in Europe is an absolute problem, right? An absolute problem. So it's an amazing opportunity. It could be counter-inflationary. It could help with the crisis on the workflow, the workforce crisis in Europe in different industries. It's incredible. But also have to think about, I think, the trickle-down economy of AI. A lot of AI runs the risk of centralizing, concentrating a lot of wealth, a lot of power in these companies. A lot of people are very focused on it. I think in order to get people excited about AI, we also have to help them understand how it's going to be impactful to their lives, how it's going to create a positive impact to their lives. And a part of that is that trickle-down economy where I think we can help transform some public services for the better. And that's why we did the report. We thought, let's try to highlight that piece of the AI revolution, things that are relatively close, that impact our day-to-day, and that are, with a relatively low cost, have a lot of influence on the way our day-to-day world works, really.
To define frontline services, in case it's obviously a word that was used a lot in the times of COVID, where we all understood it. That was definitely the social services, the hospitals, police. What else are in this concept?
So we went for teachers, cops, and nurses.
Teachers, cops, and nurses. And cops have a special place in your heart. So let's maybe start with that and share why. Why it does.
I come from a family of cops. Both my uncles are cops. So I grew up in a house full of police officers, and I have a soft spot for that profession. So it was very interesting actually to see that we did the study in the UK where our headquarters is. We actually used, for every group, we talk to them about AI. We try to understand what they know about generative AI, what they understand from what they've read in the news. Have they ever used it? And then put in front of them an expert from their field. By the way, again, interestingly, most of the experts were Israeli. That also says something. And have had them demonstrate some use cases for AI, and then had that group again talk about what they think it could do for them. So that was the methodology that we used, basically. And I think surprisingly or not, I don't know, cops knew the most. They had the most access to it. They've thought about AI the most. They're most open to it. They saw a lot of an identity fraud and all sorts of things like that. So they were more open to it. Unfortunately, it seems like teachers were the least, which for me was a bit surprisingly unfortunate. And they also saw more of the risks than the rewards. And nurses were somewhere in the middle. What grabbed me about it was that we've spent the last 20 years bringing in a lot of software into these frontline services, right? It used to be that there was a police officer walk around with a notepad and write reports and then radio them to headquarters or whatever. But we've put everybody now has an iPad or some piece of software in their phone. They record a lot of data, and software in the end is bureaucracy. That's what it is. That's what IT is. It's putting on layers of bureaucracy on top of people. And the other thing is data entry, right? We've become obsessed with analyzing data, and to analyze the data, you have to collect it. So we've made these frontline workers bureaucrats and data collectors. And for all of them, that's 2 or 3 hours of their day. So if they're 8 to 10 hour workday, that's 2 or 3 hours. It's a lot of time. And it's the part of their job that they hate, because people went into education, into healthcare, particularly into nursing and into policing, because they cared about what they were going to do. Definitely nobody's in it for the money. They went because they care and they want to be in front of patients, students, helping people. That's what they want to do. And basically the software and data entry is keeping them from doing it. And it's making their job less interesting and less fulfilling. And the opportunity that we saw was to take AI applications and rid them of that piece of their job. So just automate that and basically take those 2-3 hours back and give them to teachers to be with children, for cops to be on the streets, for nurses to be in hospitals with patients, physically touching a patient. And all of them want that at the end. That's what they're in this job for. The other interesting thing is the UK, like most other European economies, has been through waves and waves of cutbacks in public services. And it's very unpopular to cut frontline workers. Nobody wants to be the person who cut, the cop on the beat. So what they do is they cut back end. They say, oh, we're not cutting the real cops. We're cutting the paper cops. But what happens
then you
is
distribute work from them.
There's nobody do that work.
Yeah.
There's a gap in that. There's a gap, and that gap impacts in the end the front line. Yeah. And that's something that also AI can do, right? It could fix that. So we didn't go to any super advanced applications, decision-making for nurses, nothing. Just talking about how to take this day-to-day bureaucracy and data entry and automate it. That's all we focused on.
I said this at the dinner as well, that I'd just been, I literally came the day before from a meeting with 8 different entities or people from the hospital system and the teaching system and so on, about one patient's problem. And you'd have this 2-hour meeting, everyone in there, one person designated to do the minutes of the meeting, that will then go and spend 3 hours, 4 hours writing up a super bad transcript or it's so incredible that we're all sitting there. We could be recording this. I have an AI that does everything. I was so baffled at seeing how long or how far we are from implementing that type of thing, especially because the first thing they think about, at least in Europe, is GDPR. We're never going to be able to have this conversation. And maybe that's a natural place to also ask you, where do you see, because this is the biggest thing, at least I see, that everyone in the public services are very quick to say GDPR prohibits us from doing anything.
Yes, that's
that
the
has
risk.
anything to do with,
That's the risk.
Have you seen any smart developments or ways of addressing this?
I mean, unfortunately, I think so far AI in public services like high school sex, talking about it, not doing it. So we haven't really seen anybody implement much of it. There's a bit of a top-down approach, right? They're thinking about it as software. Top-down, we're going to build a national AI system. And, you read a lot of the things they write, these government reports, you think in Europe, right? America is very different. You think what they're thinking about, we're going to build an AI thingy. We're going to pour some AI juice into it. And on the other side, there's going to be whatever comes out of AI thingies with juice. We don't really know, but that's going to happen, and that's going to be amazing. And it's going to be like what Elon Musk is doing, basically, but just, and that's obviously not the case, right? Unbelievable amounts of money are being spent on developing artificial intelligence right now. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Google public filings yesterday, but they're spending $75 billion on infrastructure. There's massive amounts of money that these hyperscalers, these tech companies are spending on making these large language models easier to use, on building applications, on building, data centers and all the things you need. Most European governments, not to say maybe all of them, cannot compete with that right now. And they shouldn't. And they shouldn't be building their own infrastructure, their own applications. Definitely not for this type of thing. They should be using readily available, publicly available infrastructure, publicly available tools.
Do you see that they are taking that build approach instead of buy approach?
I think that's, from what I've seen, a lot of the conversation is about that. A national AI. And, I think unfortunately or fortunately, it's not going to work for most countries, right? You can have things hosted locally. You can, I think, work with some of these big providers, as people do today in the general world of IT, right? The Oracles of the world, to have your own local cloud for it with some rules that you put on top of some regulations. But the base engine needs to be something that's commercial. The other thing is, I really believe in the top-down, that the top-down approach is not going to work here. There's a bottom-up that has to happen because there's a learning process. And that learning process requires flexibility. Our suggestion is to put some guardrails, right? What can't happen, what can happen. And within those guardrails, let a school, a police precinct, a hospital experiment. Let the people in the front line experiment with commercially available applications and then build back to how you systematize them. That was our approach. And I think that's also going to be very helpful for European companies who obviously are closer to market, more sort of customizable, and will have an easier time reaching out to those people. And I think that would be much better than doing it as a government-run initiative.
Let's shift the conversation to something that's a bit closer to home to everyone in venture, which is what's investable here and what is not. If we start first by saying, let's look at frontline, the cops, the nurses, and the teachers, applications that are directed at them. Do you see that as a first place of looking for investment opportunities, or do you see it rather as this is important, but definitely target? Now we're quite happy in financial services. So
I have to say, I didn't, when we were doing this report, I didn't think about it as an investment.
That was not that was not the goal.
Yeah, it wasn't the goal. It was definitely a part of a learning process for us, right? We're constantly trying to think through Gen AI. So it's a part of a learning process. You learn a lot doing these things. It's a part of building a thesis. Because we're thinking bottoms up, I think investing in companies that are targeted applications might not make sense, right? The question is, how do you get these generally available platforms to be more easily used in these sectors? And I think OpenAI is doing something in the government sector. A lot of these companies are thinking about it. So the question is how to get better availability of that to the frontline workers and allow them to integrate it into their flow. I'm not sure, generally speaking, I'm not sure about software investing, that classic vertical SaaS model in the world of generative AI, right? Investing in an application for a particular audience that's just a very, very narrow application. I'm not sure if that's going to work 10, 15, 20 years from now. Even 5 years from now. Not sure how that works.
Let's double click on that to explain to me. So you think that basically vertical SaaS is in a lot of trouble in this new era of AI?
I think vertical SaaS is in some trouble, yeah. I mean, obviously, not every part of vertical SaaS. There are certain things that are very complex, require a lot of integration, require customer support, require, I think, for instance, SMB SaaS, I think, is a bit more protected in some places, things that are very operational. But these low-touch software applications, I mean, a lot of them you can, frankly, build on OpenAI, right, on ChatGPT. One of our fintech companies, the CEO showed me a couple of weeks ago how he builds authentication off of a $30,000 ChatGPT for enterprise license. How he just rebuilt his entire authentication flow, and he can kick out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of specialized software. So there are whole swaths of companies just, in trouble. And some companies that just...
Here you have, it's actually a little bit funny, Shmuel, because here you're describing actually what you also hear, for those that listen to the All In podcast, you hear Chamath talking about and saying a lot, that the whole layer of applications that are currently being sold into enterprises are in big trouble because they're going to, instead of buying it, going to just build it. Yeah. But then we just spoke just before that, we're seeing something dangerous in the public sector in Europe, which is it seems like they're trying to build rather than buy. So tell me about why is this different? And I know there's a good reason, but.
The question is what you're buying, what you're building. They're going to buy the infrastructure. They're going to buy the model. They're going to buy the computing power. They're going to buy a lot of other things. They're going to buy the security. They're going to buy a lot of things. The applications, they might create themselves. Say, okay, we're just going to have someone build something that's custom. So we're going to take this very flexible, easy to use program, and we're just going to create something. But they're obviously going to use a third-party model. They're going to use third-party infrastructure. The same thing applies to governments, right? They shouldn't be creating their own model. They shouldn't be creating their own infrastructure. They should be using something that's publicly available. They could create their own applications, and those applications can be created in the front line. They don't have to be standardized. You can have different applications for different pieces of the system. I think that's also a step change, because for many years we tried to have standardization, right? Said, okay, everybody has to use exactly the same thing, so the information will flow. But here, maybe we can have more customization. Maybe a police force in Leeds needs something different than London, and they can have something different.
One thing that's like go to a fintech company today, they will have a whole bunch of engineers hired, which they didn't before, or a bank for that reason. I think maybe if there's something that characterizes the front lines, is maybe that they haven't really undergone that process. Like, it's still a place where you have a lot of frontline workers, non-techies. So I maybe think that for that reason, you could expect that there will be a higher inclination to buy rather than build, because they will have very little build capacity. But on the other hand, I think that you're probably also, I imagine what you're also saying is, well, these organizations will maybe be buying, if we say the teachers example, they will be buying a 90% done, so to say, teaching tool, or tool for schools, AI tool. And then the last 10% is very easy, either with a service provider or on your own, to kind of say, okay, these are the guardrails within Denmark. This is our curriculum. This is the values. These are the rules, so on and so forth.
And I'll also challenge another thing. How many engineers are you going to need? Maybe there's an advantage not being that techie. Yeah. Maybe all those huge engineering departments that people created, they're going to also need to change, because it's going to be easy. It's going to be essentially, since you're working on a platform, you need product people. You need people who will build workflows rather than people who code. So maybe some of these frontline organizations actually have an opportunity to leapfrog the last revolution, which you didn't participate in, straight into this, without these extremely cumbersome development organizations that a lot of companies have. And I think if you look at the opportunity for startups here, and there's always an opportunity for emerging companies, there's going to be a great advantage for companies that are created as AI natives. You can build a company with so much less infrastructure, so you can build amazing things right now. And 2 years from now, I think much more, right? With just a lightweight backend, very flexible. That's, by the way, what happened in the move from on-prem to cloud to SaaS, right? You could build companies for cheaper, there were more, and that created a huge wave of innovation, incredible companies. The same thing's going to happen here. They're going to look different than SaaS companies look.
In this time of complete, everything is in a flux, everything can go super fast in one way or super fast in another direction. What kind of do you use to guide you in investing currently?
Good question. I think I'd love to have an answer if I knew. I use tarot cards, which I find helpful.
Yeah, that's always great.
But still we invest in two things, right? In people and in big liquid markets. And that really hasn't changed, right? So my belief is that a great team is going to figure it out if they're going after a market that's big enough and dynamic enough. It's just those two things are what matter. And definitely when you do early stage or seed investing, the application itself doesn't matter much. The product doesn't matter much. I think we're very careful right now, right? Because I think it's a moment in time where it's going to be very, very easy to make a misstep. It's very, very easy to make mistakes. A lot of things that look amazing right now are going to look terrible in a year. Sometimes there's value to just waiting and seeing.
Does what you're saying, Shmuel, mean that you're actually investing a little bit less for this reason? Mm-hmm. And are you also moving earlier with more investments? Because at the Series B stage, you're so far in to building that if you're not AI native and there's too much sunk cost in building on a platform that was the tier one the year you started?
So the only Series B deal that we did the second half of last year was Tourlane, which is a company in the package trip space. And that's a sort of a B stage. And we did it because that's a space that has a lot of infrastructure, requires a lot of infrastructure. So it does take time and effort. You have to physically build things and go and plan. But where an emerging player implementing AI can really change its destiny. And we thought that Tourlane is a great brand with a great team going after this big problem that nobody's really solved, complex leisure travel. And it was always quite expensive to solve it for a tech company because really technology wasn't solving it, but people. And now you can take this new piece of technology and solve it and build a very scalable business. So those are the types of like later stage deals that I would definitely look at. But most of my time spending with people just getting started. So incubating teams, pre-seed, things like that. I think that's, as a venture investor, definitely more interesting right now.
In other words, you have moved a little bit earlier and you're a little bit less active in the later stages.
Yeah.
Just to those that are not, like, I know Target quite well by now. So when you say I spend a lot of time with pre-seeds, that's different from Target that I would have thought about 2 years ago.
Definitely. When we started a decade ago, we spent a lot of time on later stage businesses because I think in Europe, there was a lack of funds. There were really incredible European opportunities at very, very cheap prices relative to the American peers. And that cohort of companies really performed incredibly well. Then I think we went down to sort of A rounds where, again, there were a lot of ambitious entrepreneurs who were maybe already second timers and wanted to build small things, wanted to build big things. And I think now we're very, very focused on the new generation of entrepreneurs that are emerging right now, right? So younger people who have maybe a more AI native approach to the world.
So funny what's happening, right? Because a lot has happened in the market over the last 2-3 years. Shmuel, I want to ask you, moving the agenda forward, engaging policymakers in AI. Like yesterday, I reshared a post where I saw that the European Union had come to the conclusion that they had to put real money behind AI. And then they had set aside 56 million, which is like, well, that's a substantial amount. Like, you didn't feel at all embarrassed coming out with that a week after the US signaled 500 billion, which obviously, like, there's been a lot of chatter about that, and we could talk for ages about that. I think I try and leave the US conversation to the US people because they're the people closest to that. Why should I join in on that chatter? But I think Europe, where are we? How do we move the agenda of getting Europe and our policymakers and our politicians to really put real money behind AI and understand that this is not a moment like the others, but it's actually a fork in the road?
I mean, unfortunately, I think Europe isn't anywhere right now. That's the sad reality. I think this is a moment that requires, real leadership in many regards, and fortunate to say that I don't see much of that around right now. It requires a lot of money. It requires understanding it requires pooling resources, which the EU hasn't been amazing at, and understanding that there's a sort of very robust competition. What's happening in America is absolutely sort of mind-boggling, right? Not to get into a political conversation, but if you think about the last 15 days that Trump has been president, he's probably had more impact than most presidents in our lifetime. He's just done more. So the pace of change and evolution is unbelievable. And Europe is just not moving in that direction at all, right? It is very, very slow and very, very dormant. And it requires a real step change.
And the real problem is that, just to chime in on that, what frustrates me the most is So I have always loved the EU because it creates stability. Because that's in the end, that's why we founded it in the beginning. We want to avoid ever having a second world or third world war. However, with that stability, that stability comes from the bureaucracy and all the checks and balances we've created and so on. But that also means that we've kind of built a structure that is almost built to keep us stuck.
Yep.
And I have no idea how, like, because I'm thinking a lot about it. How can I get VCs? How can I get tech founders to try and move the agenda forward? And then when I think about, and it's of course beautiful and great that we cannot have a situation where we have one person who reigns supreme with orange skin. That's a great, thing in our ecosystem. But on the other hand, it also means that, well, those 15 days we're never going to experience, and we're never going to unlock it because it's just our system is built to avoid it.
It's a downside-oriented system. And I think in all of our conversation about AI and public, you understand that Europe is very downside-oriented. The first question is GDPR. The second question, it's all the questions that people have been taught to ask. And I've, I think, again, at least in the UK, we've had a lot of interest from policymakers, from senior policymakers who've sort of called and said, okay, want to meet, want to talk. And I'm always, very happy to have those conversations. They're always very interesting. But I think they're very downside oriented. And I think the system is very downside oriented, generally speaking, right? There's a lot of, for you as a public servant in Europe, you have a lot of risk and almost no reward. And that has to change. 12 years ago or a bit more, when I started investing in Europe and continental Europe, it was an incredible promise for something new in the world of tech, right? We thought Berlin was going to be the new sort of Silicon Valley or European Silicon Valley, and then it migrated for a few places every time there's something new. Silicon Circle, or there's always something. But when you look at it, some great companies have been created, Spotify and Adyen and Revolut and, some really great companies. But relative to what happened in the US in that decade, it's really meaningless. The entire European industry is not one of the US tech giants. Europe is actually, in its best decade, fallen behind, not gone forward. And I think this decade is going to be even worse because of what's going on around this AI adoption. And you just see what the Americans are doing, right? The amounts of money, the amounts of energy, and also pooling external resources, right? They're the things like the UAE and things like that, where governments were joining and pooling resources. That's, I think, happening in America.
But tell me, Shmuel, I gotta interrupt you because I gotta make sure that we have enough time to then answer this question, which is, given this backdrop, then you just went out on a podcast, streamed to a bunch of LPs across the world that are looking at Europe and says, what's in Europe? Here we have a leading voice in European ventures saying, it's a dire time. I don't exactly see the path forward. What's your reply? What is the part that says, well, but Target still has relevance. Target has a good path to high returns, as so many other firms.
So first of all, Target invests, has always invested in Israel and the Middle East as well, right? And I think if we're having the same conversation about Israel, and by the way, about the Middle East, with emphasis to the UAE, it's a completely different conversation. Israel has an unbelievably robust ecosystem and real competitive advantage in certain areas like cyber, where it's dominant, but also around AI. And the UAE has this incredible national vision and execution, and is creating a platform for global founders and basically, I think, in a way, replacing what London was or what Berlin was for a lot of people. So that part of the world, I think, is going to be a net beneficiary of everything that's going on right now. Just a complete net beneficiary. And I have made it a point never to lie, even if it's in my best interests commercially. So I try to tell it as it is.
That said, like you're leaving me with a Yeah, exactly. Shmuel just did a mic drop. That said, so I would contend that even though Europe as a continent might not win, and even though Europe as a continent over the last decade and 2 decades have not been winning, European venture as an investable asset class is actually doing quite okay because of other dynamics than our ability to create a $1 trillion company. Because if you stitch together your fund correctly, you, in terms of the sizing of the fund, the types of bets you make, and so on, you don't necessarily have to hit $1 trillion company to return good money on your fund. And for that reason, I think that even in this scenario, where I'm also not super bullish on Europe as a continent, I'm bullish on Europe as an investable geography for venture.
It's a big continent, right? It's 500 million people. It's a large economy. It has a lot of smart, educated people. There's obviously deals to be done. Unlike, by the way, they're good venture teams in multiple places. Like when we were investing in Berlin, there were almost nobody there. Today, there's funds like Cherry or 468 who are like real sort of robust shops with experienced partners and a track record and a future. I think in many cases a bright future. You look at London, there are great funds like Atomico or Baldrige, and they're great funds around. And of course, Index and Excel and the sort of the bigger guys. But that doesn't change and some of those funds will make money. A lot of the partners will make good money. Some companies will be created. Some of them, again, really great businesses. But as a whole, as an industry, as an ecosystem, it's de minimis. It's de minimis, and I'm comparing London, Berlin, but to, for instance, Tel Aviv, where I am right now. There is no real comparison. There is no. You can spend a week. You can pack your week in Tel Aviv meeting tier 1 founders, right? You can pack the week meeting tier 1 founders, tier 1 angel investors, and tier 1 funds. And that density doesn't, unfortunately, exist anywhere in Europe that I've seen. London is the closest. It's the closest. It's a bigger city. It's got a lot of international money coming in, but it also has to protect itself from the changes, the tax changes that are, the regulatory changes that are happening right now. We have to very honestly say it. It's not completely safe. Europe as a continent is underinvesting in the things that are important. The European governments are underinvesting in the things that are important. I, by the way, don't think the money's needed for AI. I think from my point of view, investing in education, infrastructure, public safety, and those things will do more for entrepreneurship than anything else. Getting people to want to live there, to want to create, lower tax burden, better regulatory environment. So just changing a lot of that.
Shmuel, I was sitting here thinking you're coming to talk at our summit May 14th. The whole summit's tagline has become defining the path to progress. And I was sitting here thinking, that's going to be interesting to see how you'll nail that. Tell me, what is the path to progress for Europe? Is that infrastructure, safety, security, education, getting our heads together around taxation?
I think it's getting European confidence back. I think Europe has lost, in a lot of ways, its footing as a continent, as different countries. And I think it's getting that confidence back in the ability to do great things and in the ability to make big changes and going back to a creator mindset. And a creator mindset is upside, not downside oriented. That's in the end the only thing that's required. It's not $500 billion into NVIDIA chips. It's getting back that mindset and saying, okay, we're going to create incentives across the board, from the frontline workers where we started, right on the street, to the CEOs in the boardroom, and to the ministers in the cabinet room, giving them all incentives to take risks, to create, and to get upside. And across the system, we're going to reshape the system as an upside-oriented system. And if that happens, and that's a step change, but it's, I think, absolutely possible, it would be everything. Be much more than any single investment that you can make. There's no single solution. You need to change a mindset across the continent.
The other day, I thought that it was so important to remember that Europe was also the continent in which the Second World War was fought, and everyone was being ingenious, working hard, struggling on with the gloves, get out there and fought a real war. We know how to do it. We just got to get back to our roots and actually not just enjoy the privileges of having been gifted with a good past. Shmuel, thank you so much for joining me at this podcast today.
Andreas, thank you for having me.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.